I was actually rewatching season 7 recently, and that was mostly because as of the time of me filming this, I was getting into actually taking notes about my opinions of the season for an eventual retrospective. But the thing is that I was watching one of the scenes from one of the first few episodes and got a bit confused. And this was specifically at the fight of Wu and Garmadon versus the Hands of Time during the flashback. And I will say, I want to do a video about that fight scene in of itself because I absolutely adore it. But there was a moment in that fight where I realized things were either making absolutely no sense or were secretly making so much sense that I didn't even comprehend it until now. So today I want to talk about this finding and give the two possible scenarios that I've come up with for what the Time Twins' plan actually was, because one of them is very much in their favour and one of them very much isn't. But beyond those two explanations, I also want to present this to you guys as a means of trying to see what you guys think was actually going on here, because I genuinely have no clue, but the explanation I've thought of somewhat does make the most sense. But I'm not waste any more of your time, and let's talk about whether or not the Time Twins are just stupid. Now, like I said, this does stem from the beginning of Season 7, or more specifically the episode The Hatching. We're getting a lot of information from Wu regarding who the Time Twins actually are. We're being told that they fought in the Serpentine War, and they definitely had one of the stronger, if not one of the strongest elements that we have ever actually seen. And we get to see Wu's depiction of the story behind the two of them becoming evil and their eventual somewhat defeat. And the thing is that throughout all of that time, we get to see them expertly use their powers of time. We get to see them use it quite efficiently even, standing up to all of the original Elemental Alliance. And I think this was fantastic. It really did solidify the fact that they were a really big threat. The fact that they were taking on the same elemental powers that were standing before them moments ago with the ninja really did demonstrate the fact that they were a force to be reckoned with. But the thing is that as we get to see the flashback continue, we get to see the final scene between the two of them against the Spinjitzu brothers in the monastery. And that fight, of course, like I said, I want to do a video on it, is amazing. From front to back, we get to see some amazing shots, some amazing choreography. I really do like what we actually got to see depicted. But the thing is that for a majority of that fight, or more specifically until the end of that fight, the Time Twins never actually used their powers of time. They only ever used two swords, and it actually took the swords being broken for them to not actually use them to begin with. And I do want to say on a massive side note, I actually do find the use of swords with the Time Twins fairly interesting. Because, and you can actually see that throughout the majority of Season 7, if the Time Twins aren't utilizing their elemental power, they actually lose basically all of their fights. They never actually win fights unless they're utilizing powers of time. And I do think that is a very interesting display on how the Time Twins actually do operate. The reality of their situation is that they're formidable fighters as long as they do have their elemental power. And it actually does lean into this idea that they're basically just egotists. They never actually learned how to fight, they just learned how to use time. But that's beside the point. As soon as they do lose their weapons, you actually get to see a scene of the two of them without communicating, loading up their powers of time on an individual scale. We actually get to see the fact that they were somewhat planning this because they do it without actually communicating it with each other. But Achronix channels the power of slow and fast forward, and Crux channels reverse and stop. And we get to see them fire direct beams of time at the Spinjitzu brothers in of themselves. And for the longest time, I honestly found this extremely weird. I found it really strange, and I always just assumed it was just a way to continue on with the plot. There was no real way to get the powers of time coaxed into the Time Blades, basically without the Time Twins just surrendering them. It's a really weird way of looking at it, but without even any sort of consideration, you have to acknowledge the fact that that was the only way they were ever going to get the powers from the Time Twins. But why did they actually perform this move? It never made a lot of sense to me, because if you look at it, it kind of is just ineffective. In every other instance where the Time Twins use the powers of time, they use them individually and they use them in very specific instances. Whereas this just felt very brute force like. This just felt like a way to just, like I said, get the powers. It made no sense, and it's never made sense to me for the last 9 years. To be more specific, if you actually look specifically at who's using what, you will note that Achronix is firing fast forward and slow at Wu, and Crux is firing pause and rewind at Garmadon. So you look at the fact that it was very specifically tailored for the individual Spinjitzu brothers. I heard an initial theory that basically stated that they were just combining the powers of time as one united beam. But if you do look at the episode in of itself, you will note that that is not the case whatsoever, and it is planned to hit the intended target target, like I said, being Wu and Garmadon. So what actually is going on? Why are they actually doing this? Like I said, there is, in my opinion, one of two scenarios, one good, one bad. I'm gonna start with the bad because I do feel like this is the least likely of the two, because it completely counters the characterization that we have had for the Time Twins. So the bad solution, they're just stupid. They are just absolutely idiotic and just decided to fire time at them for no apparent reason. They just thought, hey, this'll work, and they just decided to do it for no particular reason. It makes no sense, depicts them as idiots, and I really don't think this was actually the intended outcome for them. It's funny, yes, it's really funny to think that the Time Twins are like, yeah, let's just try this. But the thing is that just never made sense to me, and it just simply never sat right. Because like I said, the Time Twins do this without communicating with each other, so there's an element of pre-planning here. There's an element of this was the intended function, and they actually were meant to do this. So what was their actual intention when you do look at it? What happens if you fire those time powers at a person in the fashion that they did it? And this is where we go on to what I believe the writers and the Time Twins intended for this actual scenario. Of course, I don't think they expected Chrono Steel to be made of the blades. I don't think they were expecting their powers to actually be taken in this moment. Of course, if they thought that, they would never have used their elemental power. So I think these concentrated beams of time was actually meant to basically defeat the Spinjitzu brothers in an extremely unique way. What if it was on purpose? What if when Achronix fired slow motion and fast forward at Wu, it was meant to slow him down to keep him in place and to rapidly age him to the point of him becoming departed? And then likewise, what if Crux was going to fire stop to again freeze Garmadon in place and then reverse to basically revert him into nothing? What if this was actually fully intended by the Time Twins and this was actually their way of defeating them, basically without having to lay a hand on them? Because this actually does make a lot of sense if you do look at it in this specific angle. What if this is the intended function of time? What if that is actually the intended purpose? Freeze them in place or slow them in place and then basically take them off of the age clock. What if that is actually what the plan was and they just simply never communicated it? Because if you think of it in that context, you realize that that actually is quite smart from the Time Twins, because that basically would have ended the Spinjitzu brothers right then and there if they didn't intend on actually just taking their powers from them. I think that there is real reason to believe that the Time Twins were thinking ahead, and this actually would have succeeded if Garmadon and Wu didn't plan ahead of time. I actually think the Hands of Time would have won, just simply put, if Wu and Garmadon weren't prepped. I actually think this is really weird to think about, and honestly the Ninjago timeline could have been very different if Wu and Garmadon just simply didn't think about taking powers. Remember, at this point in the timeline, we don't really have an earlier instance of someone having their powers stripped from them, so why would the Time Twins assume that this was going to be the case? I honestly think that they thought this was the best move, and by technicality, it most definitely would have been. I absolutely love this idea and this theory that the Time Twins were secretly so much smarter than we realized. I really wanted to present this because as soon as I realized it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was all I was thinking about until I've actually made this video. I love this idea, and I love this idea or headcanon that the Time Twins were just secretly really smart and were going to take out the brothers just by time alone. But this is where I am going to pass it off to you guys. Do you like this theory? Do you not like this theory? I would love to know what you guys actually think. I adore this concept, and I would like to know what you guys think as well. But thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people, and if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Thank you to each and every single one of you. Your support means the absolute world to me. But like I said, that is about it for today, and take care. Okay,